Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
And Craig, I'm here just as giddy as a clam right now. That sounds like something my grandmother might say, but I don't know how else to put it, because we are on episode 400, and I cannot believe we are here.
It's impossible. It's not possible.
It's just crazy to think. First of all, the time has just flown by as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that almost 9 years ago, you and I sat down and recorded our very first episode, which at the time we didn't realize this was going to keep going. It was just like something we were going to try out.
Yeah.
See if it goes well. You barely even knew what a podcast was.
True.
We didn't know each other as well as we do now.
Right.
We were always acquaintances and friends. We went to college at the same school, but we didn't really hang out together. We were in theater productions together, stuff like that. But one thing I knew about you, and one thing that we definitely related on, was horror movies. And so I was interested in starting a podcast, and I thought that would be a great topic, and you were the only person I could think of who might be worth a shot to sit down and chat about stupid horror movies. And it just worked, man. Like, from that episode, we just had a blast.
Yeah.
And it just gelled so well that we said, you know what, let's just keep doing this until it stops being fun.
I know. And now here we are almost 10 years later. It's crazy. Gosh, it comes up in my everyday life. Like, people are like, "Oh, you have a podcast," and like, I always feel like such a nerd. Like, yeah, doesn't everybody?
I feel like such a tool when I have to admit that I have a podcast. Because like everybody wants and thinks they have a podcast, but like at least nobody can say, "Oh yeah, well, for the last 8-9 years or so, we're about to record episode 400." That kind of makes up for it a little bit.
It does, and of course we have regular listeners who we appreciate very much, but it's just become 10 years, bro. Like I know we're not quite to 10 years yet, but 400 episodes, it's just become a part of my life. Like, I would feel weird not doing it. It would feel weird to me if we didn't get together every couple of weeks or every week or whatever and talk about a movie. So I'm glad we did it. We're still getting positive feedback. I was just, at dinner with virtual strangers last night. It was like a big group of people, and you get sat with who you get sat with. And somehow it came up that I had a podcast, and then we had something to talk about.
Thank God for that. It's even helped your social life.
I'm being blasé, but I'm genuinely grateful for it. I look forward to it. I love talking to you. I love hearing from people and talking to, the people that have genuinely, in my opinion, become our friends on Patreon.
Yeah. That was a game changer a few years ago. And, we had always kind of we never started this with the idea of trying to make a living at it or trying to make money or trying to be famous. It's literally, and still is really, like, we still have no expectations, sadly.
Right.
It's just have fun, right? And just the idea that enough people have latched onto that and are having fun with us.
Yeah.
Just at some point, people were like, how can we support you? And we're like, God, maybe we need to put something together because people are asking for it.
Yeah.
And that's how the Patreon came about, and thank God it did, because we have such a great little community back there, and we got patrons that we meet on a semi-weekly basis on Skype because of the Christopher Pike Book Club, and it's just been so much fun to have that new set of friends.
Yeah.
Even people that, maybe pop in and out every couple years and like, oh, it's that person. Like, great to hear back from you. We still remember those conversations, the movies that we both gelled on, the comments that they made, the requests they made. And it's been a wild ride.
It really has been a lot of fun and just continues to be fun. And, my my not horror fan mom, when we had done like 15 episodes, she's like, aren't you going to run out of movies to talk about? Like, I think she thought that there were like 30 horror movies, period.
Total in the world. She's so cute.
But as it turns out, we keep coming up with things to do, and we keep coming up. For example, this movie that we're doing today. Now, we did break from tradition once, right?
Yes.
I think
150th was Something Wicked This Way Comes, because that was such a special movie for both of us, and we hadn't done it yet.
Right. But the very first episode that we did was The People Under the Stairs, right?
Yep.
And so for each, like the 50th, the 100th, we did another Wes Craven movie. And again, we have broken from tradition, but for today, we decided to go back to tradition. But we've done so many. I was talking to my sister last night, and she's like, aren't you guys out of Nightmare on Elm Street movies? And we're not. I mean,
No.
There are still several Nightmare movies that we could do.
God, yes.
But for this one, I surprised myself. I recommended this.
Yeah.
And it surprised me.
Well, the reason we chose Wes Craven was because, number one, he's a horror icon, for our first episode.
Yeah.
And number two, he had more recently passed away, I believe. I was around 2015 when we started our podcast, and so we kind of wanted to pay tribute to him as well. But we didn't want to go obvious with Nightmare on Elm Street. Kind of, it's been our struggle the whole time with this podcast is how do we do the most popular movies and be original at all, So
Right.
we both knew that People Under the Stairs was kind of this underappreciated gem that not a lot of people knew of. But we both knew we liked that movie and had good, fond memories of it. And so we chose that. This movie is kind of the opposite, right? It's his directorial debut. Mm-hmm. And this is a movie that has been very notorious and was one that both of us did not have fond memories of just because it's brutal and it's violent and it has a lot. It's a rape revenge story, and we are not sex violence fans. That turns our stomach quite a lot. And I don't know about you, but when I first saw this movie, I actually actively avoided it for a while.
Me too.
Just because even as a kid, I was told this is a horrible, brutal movie that's just different from all the others. I Spit on Your Grave held that same space in my head for a long time.
Right.
And so I didn't even have the courage to get up and see it until, gosh, I think I was in high school, maybe late high school, maybe early college before I started it. And sure enough, when I watched it, my recollection is it bothered me for a long time. And I think our track record on this podcast is we like to have fun generally. We love our horror. We love all kinds of horror, but it's more fun to just see something goofy 80s horror or something that's really spooky or scary, something like The Exorcist, it's not real. And movies, when they start to delve into the territory of this is just horrible people doing horrible, brutal, sadistic things to each other, that's when horror becomes real and maybe ceases to become so entertaining.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's harder to talk about on a podcast, really. It's challenging.
Yeah.
And but we're up for the challenge. We've done it before.
Right. But I mean, if to be, fair and safe, this movie that we're doing, The Last House on the Left from 1972, it is, I don't even know. You mentioned, oh gosh, what's the other, you just mentioned it, the famous rape revenge movie.
I Spit on Your Grave.
I Spit on Your Grave. It's in a similar vein, and there is somewhat graphic sexual violence. So you and I have talked about this openly. It's something that bothers the both of us. Listener, if it's something that bothers you, maybe sit this one out because
could be triggering.
It is prominent, but this same story. I knew about it. I'm a big fan of Wes Craven. I'm not a big fan of this type of movie. I didn't see this or I Spit on Your Grave until I was in graduate school, and I approached them reluctantly. But this one, I've seen it, I've watched it, and I remembered it being very violent and very uncomfortable to watch. Now, and then that's it. I watched it once, I'm like, I've seen it, that's it. Never felt the need to see it again, but we decided to do this. So I watched it again, and I think that coming at it a second time around, I had an entirely different experience.
Yeah. Same here, by the way. I think two things. Number one, I had certainly conflated this and I Spit on Your Grave in my mind.
They're similar.
They're similar, but my mind, I think, kind of pieced them together and confused the two a little bit in the sense that I think my experience with I Spit on Your Grave made me think that this movie was quite as brutal and as graphic as I Spit on Your Grave was. Actually, it's not. Honestly, I was kind of shocked.
Same.
Yeah. We will do I Spit on Your Grave at some point.
Oh, boy. I don't know, bro. That one's a rough one. That one's really rough. But that's the thing. Like, I kind of conflate them too, but that movie is just so it's just almost sadistic, and it's painful to watch. And I knew that this movie had graphic sexual violence, but it's not as graphic as I remembered.
No,
frankly.
it's not.
It's not nearly as scandalous as I remember it being, and as I remember people talking about it. It certainly is violent, and there certainly are terrible, the antagonists, are violent psychopaths. There's no getting around that, but I was actually a little bit shocked this time around watching it. I remembered it being far worse than it is.
Yeah, me too. And I think number two, I think the second reason for that, for me anyway, is the passage of time and seeing so much stuff since then. I think for its time, and even for the time that I watched this movie, well, certainly for its time, this was one of very few, if any, films quite like it that were willing to be as brutal and as cold and show violence with unabashed sort of, The thing that Wes Craven, and that makes this movie very defensible, is that Wes Craven's whole goal in doing this was like, I'm not going to glorify this violence. I don't want this to look pretty. We are not going to glorify any bit of it. And in doing so, in showing it in its raw brutality, almost in a documentary style, which makes sense because he and Cunningham had only done documentary films up to this point.
Sean Cunningham, like, how are we going to talk about everything that we need to talk about?
It's such an intersection.
Yeah, here's Wes Craven doing his first movie ever. He would go on to, spawn one of the greatest horror franchises of all time with A Nightmare on Elm Street. And then he's working with Sean Cunningham, who would go on to produce, direct, I don't even remember, but Friday the 13th.
Like, yeah, he directed the first one, produced it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's his baby. And it's just wild. We talk about this before, and this is the way that things work in Hollywood. People work together and whatever, but it just blows my mind that in 1972, these two guys, neither of them knowing who they would be and what their careers would be, just worked on this low budget movie together, and then they both went on to, gosh, the impact is insane.
They were smart guys and very opportunistic. As we've talked before, Craven, school teacher, really wanted to be in the movie business. Bit of a hippie, very soft-spoken kind of guy. Everybody said he was just the nicest guy on a planet, seemed to have no ego. Sean Cunningham had just gotten some money from some people to make, also wanting to break into the movie business, to make a movie called The Art of Marriage, which was just a sexploitation film, one that were dressed up as like an educational film, but it was really a sexploitation documentary. There were some distributors who, well, basically theater owners. It was very different back then. You had a lot of very regional theater owners. A lot of these theater owners would fund movies themselves to put in their own theaters, usually low budget, like the B picture to go with the A picture. They used to do double features, right?
Right.
So this particular set of distributors, they went by Hallmark, which is no relation to the card company. They're theater owners out of Boston, and they needed a B picture. Well, they wanted a sex comedy, and so they approached Sean Cunningham and said, hey, we really liked The Art of Marriage. Can you do basically a remake of it that will work for us? And so he did Together. And Wes Craven ended up as an editor on that because the two of them were friends. And so the two of them got to talking, and then the Hallmark came back to them and say, hey, that was a big hit. Now we want a horror movie. Can you guys make one? And so then Sean Cunningham came back to Craven and said, hey, do you want to write and direct a horror movie for these guys? And said, sure. And that's how this started. He produced it. Craven wrote and directed it. And it's his first time behind the camera.
It's wild. I never know what to believe about the stuff that I read about these movies that we watch. But I did read that at one point this was supposed to be a hardcore porn movie.
Yeah. They were all in on it. Yeah, they were all going to do it. The cast crew, everybody was ready. What a different time, though, right? Like, this is like, oh my God. Half of these low-budget sexploitation films, and especially the porn industry, was all getting funded by the mafia at this time. I mean, porn was kind of breaking into mainstream.
Mainstream,
A lot of that experimentation now. Everybody who's got a brain is thinking, oh, I'm going to make an intelligent porn movie, or I'm going to make a hardcore horror movie, or something like that. I mean, they're going in all these wild directions.
Yeah, one of the main guys in this movie, Fred Lincoln, was a porn star.
Yeah.
and he's good in this movie. Like
more of a director and producer than a star. He was in some of his porn movies, not often as doing sex, but definitely.
I wasn't familiar with his work, but in for the sake of research.
Do go on.
I took a look. And to be, I'm not lying. I really did.
Were you impressed?
I honestly was, because the only, I looked at one. God, this sounds so gross. I looked at one movie that he had made, and it was a hardcore porn movie, but like it had a story, like he acted in it, like it wasn't just fucking.
Right,
I mean,
right.
There was that too, but
I read he didn't actually do much of that. I mean, he had acted in a lot of them and without having sex in any of them or even getting naked. But I mean, dude, he directed 350. They're all porn.
Wow.
350.
Wow. That's wild. God, that's so crazy. We talk about, so Wes Craven and Sean Cunningham, and then this guy who, is like big in the porn industry. And then the main villain of the movie, Krug. Good God, Wes Craven's first movie, his villain is named Krug. Obviously, Nightmare on Elm Street, Krueger, obviously, connection. But the guy, David Hess, who plays him, also lots of credits for acting. But he's also a musician who wrote a lot of Elvis's hits. Like, I'm researching this. I'm like, what is happening?
It's crazy, right? We talked about him once before. I can't remember what movie he was in, but we did talk about him once. I'm going to have to go back and remember which one it was.
I don't know. But he's a professional musician. Like, seriously, like he wrote some of Elvis's biggest hits.
It's nuts. Yes.
And he sings on multiple songs.
Yep.
Not like he sings on screen. He's actually a very good villain, very scary in this movie. But one of the things, and we're going to have to start talking about the movie at some point, but one of the things that blows me away about this movie is that it feels very, I would say, early 80s. I mean, this is 72, but I feel like this is giving like Friday the 13th 1 type of vibes how it feels.
I don't know, man. I feel it's more 70s grindhouse. I mean, I think I know what you're talking about, but to me, it's more like fast cars, loose women, biker gangs, sleazy, gritty, documentary-style filmmaking that was really big in the 70s. The acting is fine.
It's good.
It's not bad.
I thought it was good.
The only thing I would say is stupid and bad about this movie are the two cops, one of whom is Martin Cove.
It took me like 20 minutes into the movie. I'm like, I know that guy. And then I had to look it up. I'm like, are you kidding? Like, and it's so obviously him. He's the bad dojo owner from Karate Kid, still working.
He's Kreese.
Yeah, John Kreese. He's and still playing that role on Cobra Kai, which I've never watched. Have you watched that?
Oh God, I'm all caught up. They just released a new season. I can't wait to get to it. It's one of my favorite things on television. It is just,
I have heard such good things about it.
Dude, you're an 80s nostalgia nerd. I mean, you grew up loving Karate Kid, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You will go over the moon. They strike in my opinion, they strike the perfect balance of serving up the nostalgia, but having a fun, compelling story, but also not taking it too seriously, but still seriously enough that it's not a big joke. It's just this great mix, and it's got great action sequences. The karate sequences in that movie, some of them are just jaw-dropping. It's so much fun.
I've really only heard good things.
God.
I've never heard anything bad about it. So yeah, so he's in it. He plays this dumb cop. And yes, those parts are dumb. What was interesting to me is like, this is a violent abduction rape movie, and it's terrible. Like, it's such a terrible. These young girls get themselves into a very bad situation, and it turns out horribly, but it's so weird because it is shot and scored like a goofball comedy.
Yeah.
All of the music in the background is like...
Okay, sweetheart, I'll put you right on top of your friend here.
Take it easy. You're gonna hurt him.
Yeah, okay, the both of you settle down. You got a long ride ahead.
Like, it's just this silly, goofy... That's what blew me away with this, was like, you would think, based on those cop scenes especially, and the music in the background, you would think that you were watching the Dukes of Hazzard or something. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
It was jarring.
From what I understand, in reading interviews with Wes Craven, he did intend for it to intentionally be jarring. They took great pains to make sure that the music was totally incongruous with what was happening on the screen. So when there is some serious, horrible stuff happening on the screen, the music is almost wacky. And then when it doesn't matter, it gets kind of folksy. And like you said, when the cop scenes come in, it's just goofball. Like, it's almost like a whole different movie when the cop scenes come in.
Yeah.
And they're cut and juxtaposed deliberately against some of the most horrifying things happening. Suddenly it's like, cut away, hey, here are the zany cops who are just one step behind everything that's going on because they trip all over each other.
Like, the last half of the movie, they're just walking on the street because they ran out of gas. Like, no shit. For like the last hour of the movie, they're just walking down the road. It's ridiculous.
I have to say, I think it works against the movie, honestly.
It does.
It's
Have
not...
you seen the remake? There was a remake in 2009. Have you seen it?
No. God, no.
It's okay.
Yeah. I know that
it's not
full participation of Craven and Cunningham in that one. They got the rights back, and so they were the ones who initiated it. So I'm sure it's good enough, yeah?
It's not bad at all. The dad, I don't have it up in front of me, so it focuses more on the parents. My goodness, we've got to start talking about this movie. But the remake focuses a little bit more on the parents, and the dad is played, I'm not going to be able to come up with his name, but the bad guy in Ghost, Patrick Swayze, Whoopi Goldberg Ghost. You know, the guy that was Patrick Swayze's friend and double-crossed him.
Oh, yeah.
And that guy's good in everything. And he's good in that movie. But the remake, it takes itself more seriously. I wouldn't say it's darker, because this movie is certainly dark. But the characters feel a little bit more real, especially Junior or Willow.
Willow slash Junior.
They kind of build him in the remake as a more sympathetic character. Like, I feel like Craven and they were suggesting that here, but he was like, everybody's so over the top that it's difficult. Anyway, I was talking about the remake. It's fine. Let's talk about this movie.
You were going to say it's difficult to take seriously, weren't you?
Yeah.
I know what you mean. The way that the movie is shot is sleazy. And the reason for it is that they were documentary filmmakers before this. And Craven was like, I don't really know what I don't... He had a vision. Everybody said on the set, like, the whole production was very rushed, and it was not comfortable for everybody involved. And they were constantly getting kicked out of locations because they didn't have permits or whatever. And over half the movie was shot basically like on Sean Cunningham's parents' property, like in their house and like in their backyard and down the street and stuff in Connecticut.
And it looks like it.
Yeah, and it did. But Craven said that, look, he said, I figured we will just approach this like a documentary, and we'll just do long takes from a couple different angles, and then I'll be able to edit it all together. But he said the result was, like, not all that stuff can edit together. Like, when you don't plan it out like that and you're just doing that, like the shots don't always match up and you can't necessarily do the good edits. And that adds a little bit, I think, to the amateurish feeling of the movie. But then also it adds to the realism of the movie because it does end up with this sort of documentary cameras are in their movie, not unlike Cannibal Holocaust was.
Right. It feels voyeuristic.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like you were watching. It's difficult to explain, I guess. I mean, it's not a difficult concept, but it doesn't look cinematic like a
Correct.
movie. It looks like you are there watching it, or you're there behind a camcorder.
Yeah, filming the whole thing.
Yeah.
That feel of the film, coupled with, again, we see a lot of stuff from this era that's very amateur, and it just feels amateur. And again, it's kind of in that vein cinematically, so you can't completely like lose that veneer. And then, like you said, a couple of the characters are so over the top that you're it does also take you out of it just a little bit. But somehow the movie overcomes that emotionally, I think, ultimately. I wouldn't say that it holds up today to the same degree that it did back then, or even when I watched it, like a decade or two later, but I think it's still there.
I don't know if I'm just romanticizing Wes Craven, but watching this again yesterday, I'm like, it was over, and I'm like, that was a good movie.
Yeah.
It's terrible. The events of the movie, in case we never get to them, are these two teenage girls.
17. One's just turned 17, yeah.
Right. Or they're going to go to a concert and they want to get some weed and they meet a guy on the street, and it just turns out this guy happens to be part of this murderous group of people. And so these girls are abducted by them. The thing that is most horrifying to me, and I think that this is absolutely genius, is that all of this happens on the main protagonist / victim's doorstep.
Yeah.
That is what is most horrifying to me. Like, they get abducted by these people and these terrible, villainous, violent people. Their car happens to break down, and so they get the girls out of the car, and the main girl, Mary, looks up and literally is looking at her mailbox. Like, they are at her house.
Yeah.
And that to me is the most horrifying thing, that something so brutal and violent and horrible could happen to you.
Yeah.
Just within arm's reach of your sanctuary, of the place where you're safest. Her parents are home. They're worried about her.
Yeah.
And she is being brutalized a couple of 100 yards from her house. That blows me away.
Well, it's classic Craven. It's like he's setting up the themes for the rest of his career, like it or not, right? He's always bringing the horror into suburbia, into the places where you feel like you're safe. That's all of Nightmare on Elm Street is like that, The movie that he does after this, The Hills Have Eyes, is kind of similar. It's like the city people, the comfortable suburban city people going on a trip that are in a place suddenly where they're, that is foreign to them, and they're out of their element, even though they don't feel like they should be. And then horrible, terrible things happen to them. And it's also a classic teenager setup. I mean, my life was like this, Hey, Mom, Dad, we're going to go see the Aerosmith concert in the big city.
Right.
We're going to drive to Kansas City with a car full of our friends. We're going to go, don't worry, we'll be home late, but we will be home. But the reality is, if we got into the wrong neighborhood in Kansas City and we needed gas or something like that, we were sitting ducks. We were not street smart.
Sure.
We didn't know what was going on. And it's kind of what happens here. This girl's got these lovely parents. It's just been her birthday. They clearly want to have like a family birthday thing together, just the three of them, when she gets home. They're decorating for it. Mom's baking a cake.
That's crazy too, because, again, I don't know much about the process, but Wes Craven's the director. I assume that he had something to do with the editing as well. But the way that I've already talked about, the music just doesn't make sense tonally. It's crazy. But then also you will jump from these brutally violent scenes where these girls are being beaten and raped. And then it will just jump back to the parents, like, so happy, like making a birthday cake and decorating the room.
Oh, wow. Cockeyed as hell. Oh, John, I should have bought one at the bakery. They have such pretty ones there.
Nonsense. It's truly remarkable. Come on in the living room. I want to attack you.
And it's jarring. That's why I say that I think that it's a good movie. It's weird. Like,
Yeah.
knowing that this is his first movie, I just look at it and think, I see your early genius.
Yes.
This is not perfect, and you will get better. But you are doing things that are shocking me and surprising me.
And it's not just shocking and different and surprising, but it's a little unsettling.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it speaks to a deeper fear in all of us. You're old enough, like me, that you've probably been in a situation where something terrible happened, right? Or you heard of something to somebody you know or somebody you love. And you're thinking, God, while that was going on, like, I was just at home having the best time of my life watching TV with somebody.
Yeah.
That's life. That's what happens, you know? And here he's throwing it right at you. These poor parents are blissfully unaware in their excitement and their giddiness of getting ready for their daughter and goofing off and playing around and flirting and stuff like that, that in the meantime, their daughter is being horribly brutalized. Right in their backyard, essentially. You know, there's nothing that scares us more than that. You know, we all want to feel like we're away from it. Like evil and badness is something that we can stay away from and remain blissfully ignorant of. But please don't remind us of our ignorance, you know? But he does. And these kids, they're out of their league. They're out of their element. The older girl that she meets up with, Eileen, is portrayed by her. Like, they have a little discussion about her before she takes off. I don't know about Eileen. You know, I've never met her before.
No, it's Phyllis, isn't it? Phyllis is her name, I think.
You're right.
Yeah.
Phyllis. She's more of a city girl. She's a little more street smart.
Yeah. God, Todd, I feel like we could talk about this all day. I could talk about it all day with you. I don't even know where to begin because I've already set up what happens. These girls get abducted, but I liked Phyllis. Phyllis seemed tough. And I guess that we're just supposed to believe that because she's from the rougher side of town, like, she's just more enabled to deal with this situation, I guess. I don't know.
I think so.
And that's fine. And she is. And then the other girl, Mary, is so privileged and not equipped for this that she basically just breaks, like, from the get out. And Phyllis has to kind of take care of her. And I just thought there were such interesting dynamics. And then when you read about the making of the movie and you read that dynamic with those two actresses was really kind of real. Like, the actress who played Mary was terribly, terribly uncomfortable with all of it, with the violence and the sexual violence. Multiple people who worked on the movie have said in interviews, you see that horror on her face. It's real. She was terribly uncomfortable. And the other girl who played Phyllis, okay, so the girl who played Mary,
Sandra Peabody,
and the porn star guy who we've already talked about it, condemn this movie. Like, they won't even talk about it in interviews.
Well, they do now.
Do
like
they?
I found an interview on YouTube, where the guy Fred Lincoln was interviewed and talking quite extensively about it. He seems to be more comfortable. Sandra Peabody, she said some things, but she does not want to be on camera about it. And you're right. I still think she feels like, well, her feelings have appraised, I think, in the passage of time. But when she first went to see this with her mother at the cinema, she was so horrified by the final product. It was just like a cast screening that she stormed out. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. I think now she recognizes that it was kind of important and that it was, she's maybe a little more proud to have participated in it. And she, you know, the benefit of time, you can look back and forgive a lot of things. But apparently she was not treated very well by David Hess because he was very method. And she studied under Meisner. She was a very serious actress. I mean, this woman...
She was young. She's a child.
Yeah, but like she'd been acting since she was a child. She was in plays, she was in soap operas, TV commercials. She had won awards by this point, and she had done a couple of these low-budget exploitation films and things like that. She wasn't just like green person picked off the street who was out of her element.
Sure.
She just, her way of acting just did not gel with them. In fact, it sounds like she wasn't always able to deliver what they wanted, despite her being terrified. And so part of the cast took it upon themselves to terrify her a little bit to get her to...
I don't like that.
I don't like that at all either. I think that's just uncalled for, really, but...
Yeah, it's a job.
Apparently, Craven was consoling her the whole time and quite nice to her on the set the whole time. But
well, that's not difficult to believe because he seemed like a very soft, kind man. But I read things too. I read that one of the actors, the guy who plays Junior, they were shooting a scene and he didn't feel like, and maybe Craven, I don't know, but the other actor didn't feel like she was giving it her all. And so he physically threatened her. Like he held her over a cliff and said, if you don't get this, I'm going to throw you off this cliff. Like, that's not cool.
No. I'm not a fan of terrorizing actors to get...
I understand that actors take their jobs very seriously. And I also know the frustration of working with somebody and you just feel like it's not working. And you feel like you're doing everything you can do and maybe you feel like they're not. But that's not... God, it's just so wild. Like, it's just...
I know, right?
That happened. And we've talked about a lot of movies that were made, decades ago, where people could get away with things that they would never get away with today. But that just kind of blew my mind. I don't know. What do we want to talk about? Okay, so I feel so bad for these girls. Like, they were just... First of all, to think about how young they are. This girl is on the verge of her 17th birthday. And they're abducted by these sex criminals who we hear
recently
on the
escaped.
Radio recently escaped.
It's kind of
And we hear on the
classic
radio
setup.
and TV like, these sex criminals escaped and they're just trying to buy some weed for the concert. Like, it's not like these are, they didn't do anything bad.
That's one of the unsettling things of it is just how quickly and easily they get into trouble. And it's totally believable. You just talk to the wrong guy in the street and he's like, oh yeah, come inside, I'll get you some weed. And then they close the door behind him, lock it.
It's horrifying because this is the kind of scenario that could happen. Things that could happen in real life are very scary. So basically, they're abducted. And the plot of the story, folks, is that they are abducted. They take them on the road. They happen to break down right in front of this one girl's house. And then they sexually and physically torture them in the woods in basically Mary's backyard.
Yeah.
Phyllis gets away for a while. Oh, God, that part of the movie made me so angry because there's no reason why she couldn't have gotten away.
Right?
And the fact that they eventually caught her and murdered her brutally. And then they brutally rape Mary and she tries to run away and they kill her too. That's another difference between the original and the remake. In the remake, Mary, I don't remember if they used, but that character is brutalized horribly. I would argue more horribly than the actress in this movie, but she doesn't die. There's a part in this movie where the parents suspect that something weird is going on and they run outside to find their daughter dead. In the remake, she's not dead. She's alive and they bring her back. But other than that, it's very much the same. Then the parents decide that they are going to take revenge on the killers. And they do. And it's weird.
Yeah.
We've got about 15 to 20 minutes to talk.
Well, you gave the summary, so we can now just start talking about individual bits. I mean, I'd be curious, where did you see this? Did you see it on a streaming service or?
Yeah, a free streaming service that I don't use regularly that's out there. It's Crackle. Crackle. Free. Lots of ads. So this hour and 20-minute movie took me about 2 hours to watch because lots of ads. It's out there.
There are apparently a million cuts of this movie out there. Like, you never know what you're going to find, what's going to be in it and what's not, because even when it was being put out to theaters, and this is also a different era, right? It's just so hard to believe. Like, angry projectionists and theater owners would cut bits out that they didn't like. And so every time they get a print returned, there would be pieces and bits of it missing. And at one time, Craven said they had a whole little studio set up to take all these returned prints and go through them and try to piece together whole films from the bits that they got back. That was how strong the reaction was to this movie. And yet, at the same time, Roger Ebert gave this almost a full 4 stars and a thumbs up. And he gets very critical, usually, of these types of films. But, you know, he saw something in this. There was at least one case of a theater chain that was, you know, parents and people were demanding that they stop showing this movie. And they stood up to defend it. And they said, look, we think this is more than just an exploitation movie cash grab. We think this movie has a message. We think that it speaks to things that are actual dangers and horrors that teenage girls face in their lives. It's a cautionary tale in a way. And they also said nothing about the violence on the screen is glorified. Everything is very real and presented appropriately, they said. And for that reason, we're going to keep showing it. And that's a pretty bold stance to make. So I'm curious because there's so many different cuts of this movie. It seems I went online and I found a documentary. I also found a whole bunch of found footage that they found kind of in the early 2000s that they thought was lost. None of it terribly significant. Some of it was just lengthenings of different scenes and maybe just a little bit more. But as far as like adding more explicitness to it, not really. But one thing that was different from the original cut that they put together and what kind of ended up going out to theaters, and some people apparently, some cuts of this exist where when they parents find Mary, she's not quite dead yet. And so she's able to tell them without a doubt, this is what happened to me and these were the people, and in her dying breath. And I noticed a little hint of that in the cut that I had. Like when they found Mary just sort of jarringly by the side of the river that she had walked into, I could see her move a little bit, and I saw her mouth start to move as they looked at her. Then immediately it cuts to a different like angle on the shot, and her mother says, "What can we do to save her?" And the father says, "Oh no, she's already dead." And I was like, "Oh, I thought we were getting a last gasp something from Mary." And then when I went back into the trivia, I saw that no, actually cuts do exist that have that in there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I wasn't sure if you saw that little bit in your cut or not.
No, when the parents find her, which, gosh, it's so crazy. So what happens is they brutalize these girls, and Phyllis almost gets away, but they catch her and they stab her to death, and it's very violent and terrible. At some point, Krug rapes Mary violently, and it is a very upsetting scene. It's very upsetting. It wasn't as graphic as I remembered, and it wasn't as graphic as I expected.
Yes. I remembered this lasting longer and being more graphic, and it was neither. Honestly, I don't even know if it's a minute long.
It's very brief. It's obvious what is happening, but there's not a lot of like explicit nudity or...
Yeah.
It's terrible. I mean, sexual violence is just terrible, and I just hate it, and I really don't... I don't seek out movies that I know are going to be about that, but when I go into a movie like this and I know that it's coming, like if I'm prepared, I'm better.
Yeah.
You know, like if I know it's coming, if I'm prepared to deal with it. If it takes me by surprise, it just might wreck me. Mm-hmm. But it's not as graphic as I expected, but considering the fact that this young woman is supposed to be
17,
barely 17 years old, it's an absolute nightmare. And then when she walks away from it, which is also, I mean, it's just disgusting. And it's so hard to think about. Like, she's just been brutalized, and all that she can do is just pull up her pants and walk away. And she just walks into the lake, and then they shoot her several times. So I suppose we're to assume that she's dead. Well, then they all get cleaned up. This terrible group of psychopaths get cleaned up and go to her parents' house, where this is where things start to get a little goofy for me, because I just think that times are very different now. Like, this would never happen. Like, if a group of weirdos show up at my door, I'm not going to be like, sure, come in. You can stay the night. I'll make dinner.
Yeah.
Like, fuck off. No. Bye.
You just have to kind of imagine that, because it does just cut to them in the house. You kind of have to imagine that some sort of good psychological manipulation happened in the meantime.
They clean up. They put on like shirts and ties and stuff.
Yeah.
And the girl, there's one girl in this group of psychopaths. Oh my God, Todd, I swear to God, we could talk about this all day. But the one girl, Sadie, she's such an interesting character because she seems like a psychopath. But then there's one point in the movie where Phyllis almost gets away. But Sadie catches up to her, and Sadie takes her down and says to her, I'll help you. I'll get you out of this.
Mm-hmm.
But Phyllis, I mean, of course, she's in self-defense mode. I would do the exact same thing, like stabs Sadie or something. Did you think in that moment that Sadie was genuine? Like, I really thought in that moment that woman, that girl who has fallen into this terrible group of men, I really thought in that moment she would have helped.
You think so?
Phyllis and Mary get out. I think so.
That's debatable. Maybe. I sort of felt like Junior was on the edge of helping as well. I mean, he was always kind of cast as the one who was a little more uncomfortable with everything, and he's more interested in getting his fix than anything else. And these guys are such assholes, even to each other, that they're just like, they don't even give a shit. Like, this guy's going through withdrawal, and he's like getting a little more and more like...
I didn't care for that. I didn't care for that whole plot line. Like, it just seemed really silly.
Yeah, I mean, it felt obligatory. Like, it's kind of... I Spit on Your Grave has a little bit of the character kind of like this, too. But toward the end, he's the one who kind of betrays them and almost does them in.
If I remember correctly, I Spit on Your Grave has a character who is literally challenged.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
Intellectually
He's
challenged.
sort of the Junior equivalent in a way. I think
Yeah.
as far as the plot goes, you know.
Yeah. This kid, I mean, you kind of feel bad for him. Like, he's supposed to be Krug's son, which I don't know.
No way.
This adult man is not this other young man's son. I don't believe that at all.
Right?
But he just seems dumb. I understood Mary's motivation when she was trying to endear herself to him. You know, she's trying to get herself out of this.
But it's not very sophisticated.
It's
it feels
not.
real forced. And it's
It does.
Shut up, huh?
Junior, is that your real name?
I told you to shut up,
I
Rob.
gotta give you
Slap
another name.
silly.
I'm gonna give you another name. I'm gonna call you Willow. Willow.
Willow.
Willow. Because you're kind of beautiful and you shake when the wind blows.
Yeah.
Krug's the wind.
Oh, let me alone, huh?
Willow, do you have a girlfriend?
Oh, sure. I got lots of girlfriends just waiting to get me.
I don't think you do.
Well, you're right.
I want to give you something.
I don't want that.
It's worth a lot.
I don't want
See? I want to be your friend.
Oh, you want to get free.
I want to be your friend.
Yeah,
I want to be your friend. I can get you a fix.
It's a silly plot device to get her necklace around his neck.
Exactly. And not to mention the whole forced plot device of the cops. That part is so stupid. I just, God, I don't even know what to say about it. But eventually, so the parents take them in. Junior, the kid that you were just talking about, is going through withdrawal, apparently, and so he's barfing. And so the mom, who is the most hospitable person in the world, is checking on him, and she sees Mary's necklace. They had given her an early birthday
A
present.
peace sign.
It was just a peace sign necklace. So
Irony.
generic, like, oh my god, a peace sign necklace.
It must be hers.
But they figure it out, and then they run down to the lake, and they find Mary dead. And then they decide to exact their revenge. Now, this is where it got to me more like I Spit on Your Grave,
Yeah.
where it becomes like rape revenge. What shocked me was that these parents were more motivated by revenge. Like, that was the emotion that motivated them. Like, the fact that their child had just been brutalized and murdered, to me, I would think that despair and sadness would be your primary emotion. But they're immediately motivated by revenge, and
And they immediately go into like cold calculating mode, really, like very business-like.
Yes.
And that just didn't ring as true. It felt a little sloppy.
it did. And the dad sets up Home Alone booby traps in the house, which I totally forgot about. I didn't remember that at all.
Me neither.
Something else, and maybe this is just a thing with rape revenge movies of the 70s, but something that always bothers me is that in their pursuit of revenge, women sexually gratify men.
Yeah.
And that bothers me. It bothers me. Like, I understand what the mother's purpose was. I get what she's doing. But she blows that guy to the point that he's about ready to come
Yeah.
before she bites his dick
Yeah.
off. Like, just bite it off. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like it. I feel like something very similar happens in I Spit on Your Grave.
It does.
The woman who has been violently brutalized gratifies one of her attackers
Before she castrates.
right. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like it. In the remake, the parents also take their revenge. This, again,
Is it just as bad?
it seems like they made an attempt to ground it more in reality. And so there's not that. Like, the mom is certainly not blowing any of these guys that raped and killed her daughter. Certainly not. It's not a bad movie. It really isn't. Like, if you haven't seen the remake and you want to, watch it. It's fine. It's a fine movie.
I mean, I was just going to presuppose, like, I'm sure that it has a cinematic quality to it
Absolutely.
that takes away from the feeling you get. You know, this movie, I think it's amateurishness. At some points, like you said, like we've discussed, it works against it. It makes the movie rather silly in points. It doesn't always dull the violence, but also in some ways it kind of elevates the film. It's almost like a happy accident, really. Although I do feel like Wes Craven did know what he was doing.
I think that he was a very, very talented filmmaker, and this is his first thing ever. And I swear to God, I can't even really tell you why. I mean, okay, so the parents kill the bad guys, and the cops who have been walking to their house for the last 45 minutes finally show up to witness them killing the bad guys. It's dumb. But when it was over, I don't even know how to explain it, but when it was over, I'm like, that was a good movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? I don't even know.
I just don't know. If I showed somebody now, like a kid, not a kid, I would never show this to a kid, but like if I just showed this to like a fellow a human being who's maybe a generation younger than me or 10 years younger than me, or somebody who's never seen this before, really wasn't into these kind of movies or whatever, this movie, I really wonder what they would think of it. I think through a modern lens, it's probably a very mixed bag.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they'd be as shocked, maybe, because
I doubt it.
I think worse, we've seen so much worse in terms of sexual violence. We've
Yes.
seen much more mean-spirited movies than this is. And you can't call this movie mean-spirited because there's so much goofiness in it.
No, not really.
But there's just enough of an edge to it that it worked, particularly for its time. It certainly set itself apart. This is not the first rape revenge story that was ever put to film. and not the first deliberately shocking exploit. They were floating around like crazy in the 70s, you know?
Yep.
But somehow this one, after about 5 title changes, apparently, that's what took him a while to latch onto, suddenly just became very notorious and rigorously defended by many critics, and very divisive, just ripped apart by just as many critics, but made them tons of money. And then launched Sean Cunningham and Wes Craven into the stratosphere as far as their future careers went. Mm-hmm. It's pretty nuts.
It's crazy. It really is crazy. I feel like it's notorious. Like, this is one of those movies that gets talked about being, terribly violent, and it is. I'm not going to say it's not. It is this. It's exploitation. You can tell from the first 3 minutes that it's an exploitation film. This young girl, who we're to believe is 16 years old, one day shy of 17, her tits are out in the first 3 minutes.
Showering. They have she has a conversation about her tits with her parents, which is kind of funny.
That was really funny.
Hey, no bra?
Of course not. Nobody wears those anymore.
Nobody except us drill sergeants.
Yeah, but look, Estelle, you can see her nipples as plain as day.
Daddy, don't be so clinical.
But it's immodest.
So I'll get some sandpaper.
Look, young lady, when I was your age...
When you were my age, you all wore brassieres that made your tits stick out like torpedoes or something.
Tits? What's this tits business? Sounds like I'm back in the barracks.
All right, then. Mammary glands. They used to tie them up like little lunatics in straitjackets, and they stuffed socks in their bras.
Mary!
You told me that yourself, Mother.
If God had meant women to go around with their bust exposed, Mary Collingwood, he wouldn't have given us clothes.
But seriously, the first 3 minutes, teenage girl, tits out. This is an exploitation movie. For whatever reason, I think it's well done. Like, the guy who played Junior, he was going for a character, and that's fine. I get that, and I've seen him in other things. He took me out of it a little bit because he was so goofy. But David Hess as Krug was a very frightening, intimidating villain.
Oh, yes.
I loved the girl who played Sadie.
Yeah.
She's so crazy. Like, in the beginning, she's got this heavy makeup on, and she's got her hair teased out as far as it can go. So, like, she's got this huge teased out do. But then later, when they're trying to pretend to be normal people while they're staying with the parents, she has her hair combed down, and she looks just like a normal person. Like, I was impressed with really all of the villains, all of their ability to go from so violent and brutal, just stained in blood. I mean, they're just covered in blood for much of the movie, but then to clean themselves up and present themselves as normal people. Ultimately, I don't know what to say about it, but I find this movie compelling.
Yeah.
And if you are a horror fan, if you are a Wes Craven fan and you haven't seen this movie, maybe you're scared to watch it for the same reasons that I was. It's not as graphic as I remember it being. Mm-hmm. It's not as brutal as I remember it being. And ultimately, I do think that it is compelling film to watch. I would recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel exactly the same way. Does it hold up today?
No.
Not like, hey, this movie looks like it could have been shot yesterday. Absolutely not.
No.
Does it hold up emotionally? Like I said, it's a little bit of an uneven batch. But can you watch this and walk away and feel like that was not a waste of my time?
Yeah.
That's how I felt. Yeah, maybe because I'm a horror fan. I don't know. My parents would hate it.
Sure.
But
oh, yes. Yeah.
But that's the point, really. Like I said before, I think Wes Craven was successful in making a movie that did not glorify violence. And that is one of the things that turns my stomach as much as sexual violence does. And that is any movie that I feel is just glorifies violence. And that's why, like, one of my most hated films is 300. I almost walked out of that movie, and I never walk out of movies because I was like, this film is trying to make this violence look beautiful, and it's succeeding. All these people slashing each other is like it's like a ballet, and it's a slow motion and beautiful music and these perfect compositions. And I'm like, well, I just felt like morally that was reprehensible.
Yep.
Apparently, obviously Quentin Tarantino is a huge fan of Craven's earlier output. Craven went to a premiere of Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, and he walked out because he objected to the violence in it. And Tarantino made a comment publicly like, look at this, the guy who directed Last House on the Left walking out of my movie because it's too violent.
Right.
And Craven shot right back at him and said, Last House on the Left didn't glorify violence like your movie did. And that's the difference between us. And I'm right with Craven on this one. I love Tarantino too, but I also don't like.
Yeah, they're both brilliant. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so somehow this movie manages to do that even as an amateur first effort. There's a magic there that you can see that has obviously extended well into Craven's all too short career.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it was long, but it's too short for me.
Joke. So for our 500th episode, are we gonna have to do like music of the heart?
Oh God. No, we've got a couple TV movies and one.
We haven't even done all the Nightmare movies yet.
No, we haven't.
We haven't done.
Well, he didn't direct them all.
Dream Master, Dream Child.
We've got also. We did Deadly Friend, but we didn't do Deadly Blessing. So we've got that
I haven't
one
done
as well.
that. Deadly Friend was great though.
Oh man, go back and listen to that one.
Do or don't. Like I listen to our old episodes, and sometimes the sound quality is so bad. I'm like, oh my God, this is embarrassing.
We were just two guys on a sofa, Give us our Craven and Cunningham moment,
Just two guys on a sofa, and here we are 500 years later, and I still love it. I appreciate you, my brother, my friend. This has been a labor of love for a long time, and if I wouldn't do this with somebody I didn't like.
Same here. 100%.
I genuinely enjoy getting to talk to you. I mean, you live in China, for God's sake.
Who would have imagined that?
Who would have imagined? And I still get to chat with you once a week, and I really appreciate it. And I so appreciate all of the people who listen and our patrons. And we're not famous. It's not like we have this enormous following, but those of you who listen to us are so kind. And it's genuinely, it makes my heart feel good to hear from you, and to hear that we can make you laugh at work or on your commute. So thank you. I mean, without those of you who listen, we would just be talking into an echo chamber, and we'd probably keep doing it anyway.
Yeah.
But it's really nice to hear from all of you.
Yeah. Well, Craig, you're one of my very best friends. I think about the podcast almost every single day. We're always planning.
I love you, bro.
What's coming next, right? Yeah. God. And we've been through so much, and we got so much more to go through. I feel I'm so excited. I can't wait. We just got to sort out what we're going to do for our 800th episode. That's what I'm looking forward to. But I ditto everything you say.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward
when we've done all of the horror movies that exist.
All of them?
Well, thank you so much for listening to this, our 400th episode. For those of you who've been with us through the very beginning, and those of you who have just joined us, it doesn't matter. We appreciate you so much. Really, thank you so much for your support and your love. Both our patrons who are over there at patreon.com/Chainsaw Podcast, and those of you who just drop us a line every once in a while on our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, our website, which is chainsawhorror.com, or those of you who are just lurking in the background and have yet to pop in and make yourselves known. Thank you so much for listening. Please do us a favor and share this with a friend that you think would enjoy it. Also, write us an honest review on any one of those sites, but especially the Apple Podcasts app. As long as it's good, we love to read all those reviews. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and the Chainsaw.